Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome into Good Morning Broncos, your daily cup of coffee and Broncos conversation that you get every single day. You can get this on Mile High Sports YouTube page. Make sure you subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on our morning conversation as we set the table for the day and for the week as it pertains to the Denver Broncos. I'm Cody Roark. I cover the Denver Broncos for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person daily in Del Valle at practices, home games, away games. And I just want to try to bring Broncos fans a little bit closer to the action as to what's really going on with the team on a daily basis without the overreaction, without the hot takes, without the false narratives that we see so commonly pumped out in this media market. We want Mile High Sports to be a hub for you. I also do the daily Lockdown Broncos podcast where you get more content as well. But going into our conversation here on today's show, it's game week for the Broncos. And there's a lot that they need to get done this week as it leads up to their first preseason kickoff matchup against the Arizona Cardinals here in the preseason. That game's going to be on Friday. That kicks off at 8 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. You can get it on NFL Network, or you can even watch locally as part of 9 News if you have access to all that stuff. But as we set the table for this week ahead of the first preseason game, we have to recap what happened over the weekend at Broncos camp. They were back on the practice field on Saturday at the Centura Health Training Center, and the offense, tell you what, they're making good progress. 2 back-to-back good days in a row. Here's the video recap that I shot for Mile High Sports. Let's check it out in this recap. What happened in Del Valle on a scorching day on Saturday? In the NFL, it's all about stacking and consistency and finding that. And while the Broncos offense has struggled through the first part of training camp, they've had 2 back-to-back good days as they progress forward in Sean Payton's offense. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Saturday's practice in Dove Valley at the Centura Health Training Center for day number 10 of Broncos camp. We saw Russell Wilson and the Broncos offense find more consistency on the afternoon. Started off in 7-on-7 where Russ went perfect, connecting on passes to Kendall Hinton, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Albert Okwuegbunam. And then you get to the red zone period where the Broncos had some competitiveness there. Russell Wilson threw a touchdown pass to Brandon Johnson with pressure coming down from Jonathan Cooper. Much more maneuverability here for the Broncos offense going forward, but some other things that we saw as well in a need-the-touchdown period. According to Sean Payton, one of the things that Russell Wilson did really well was dialing things up, quick passes to Marquez Callaway, Brandon Johnson, and then they ended practice with a 47-yard touchdown pass to Jerry Jeudy over Damari Mathis, who had tightly contested coverage. But consistency and finding rhythm is important as the Broncos continue to go through their offensive install. And look, I think it's carrying it over here to the NFL preseason, which next Friday, the Broncos have the first matchup against the Arizona Cardinals on the road. For more Broncos news, updates, and more, make sure you follow Mile High Sports. Check out milehighsports.com. I'm Cody Roark. More importantly, Russell Wilson, the offense, I said it in the recap video. You have to find ways to stack days consistently. It can't just be, hey, you have one good day of practice and then the next day you go back to being bad. You simply cannot have that inconsistency. But I would say, considering from the start of training camp, the defense has been ahead of the offense because of the fact that a lot of the stuff that the Broncos defense was doing last year, they're just carrying it over and they're changing a few things in terms of some looks and some terminology. But for the most part, the structure of the defense remains intact. You have a couple of new faces added into the mix. We'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the impact players we've seen a little bit later on here in today's Good Morning Broncos. Before we have Broncos practice this morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Obviously, this is a media-only practice. Fans will be able to attend on Tuesday and Wednesday, but kind of diving deep into this, the defense has really had their way through the first part of training camp, but we've seen the offense gradually do a little bit more. And I would say, from my observation, Russell Wilson has looked much more comfortable in the last few practices with carrying some things over because, look, he knows, hey, there's going to be pressure. And that's what Sean Payton wants Vance Joseph to do. He wants Joseph to throw pressure looks at him because the offensive line has to be better. It was one of the worst offensive lines last year. Now it looks entirely different. You have Garrett Bowles coming back from a major leg injury last year. You have Ben Powers, new addition at left guard. He's replacing Dalton Reisner. Lloyd Cushenberry looks bigger and has had a really good training camp so far to start. Next to him, you have Quinn Miners, who's put on 20 pounds this offseason. So mean, physical, being able to move, that's something that Sean Payton wants. And then you add new addition at right tackle, Mike McGlinchey, I would say he's still easing his way into things. And he's been solid for the most part, but there's some areas of his game where he has to improve before the regular season. So far through training camp, he's had several false start penalties, which Sean Payton absolutely despises penalties, whether it's pre-snap, whether it's something avoidable, whether it's something that can be fixed with technique. And the false start thing has definitely been an issue so far throughout the early phases of training camp. And look, we've even talked to Sean Payton. We've asked him, what are your thoughts? How do you counteract that? How do you get rid of penalties? How do you create a more disciplined football team? And while you want to get reps and you want to get in and out of the huddle, he doesn't want players to have to think too much, right? If they're thinking too much, it means that they're not knowing their assignment. They don't know what they're supposed to do. And he says that can really impact your development as you're trying to go through an offensive install. So eliminating those is key. But really, if it continues to be an issue, Sean Payton even said that it comes to the point where you have to pull a player from the lineup or from his role so he can lock in, because you can't have that. And I'll give you a good example here. And we'll see how this applies to different players, right? How it applies to guys like Mike McGlinchey, Greg Dulcich, because in Friday's first move the ball period that Denver had, Greg Dulcich had a false start. Mike McGlinchey had a false start, and that backed Denver up to a 1st and 20 on their own 15-yard line. And then the next play was obviously a dump off to Samaje Perine, but then a batted pass to the line of scrimmage led to a Randy Gregory pick six. These things hurt you, and these are the things that hurt the Broncos last year. The second team unit, however, when they came in, Albert Okwuegbunam had a false start. Sean Payton yanked him from that. And then DeMontre Jacobs, offensive tackle, he had a holding penalty on 4th and 18. It made it 4th and 28. He just ended it right there. He's like, we're not even going to go for it on 4th and 28. We're going to move on to the next period. And that's where the Broncos first team offense came back onto the field, moved the ball downfield. And obviously Brett Maher kicked in a 52-yard field goal, which would have essentially tied the game at 3-3 in that simulated period here. But Sean Payton, the one thing I can say from my observation, zero tolerance, zero patience for penalties. Denver has to be much more disciplined in that area after they ranked near dead last season in the NFL. Most yards affected, and obviously a large quantity of flags thrown on a game-to-game basis. You don't like seeing that, and I understand that the NFL has different rule changes. Sean Payton has brought NFL officials in for practice throughout the past few days there to be able to coach these guys up in a sense on new rule changes. But also, these officials are in the meeting rooms here while practice is happening, while training camp is going on. They'll reference the tape as a team. And then when questions arise about why was this called a flag? Why was this a penalty? The officials explain from the nuances of the rules there. And look, you know me, I'm a big proponent that I think officiating has too much power and influence on the game here today. And I think that a lot of times you cannot play defense the way that it was meant to be played. And as a former cornerback, a defensive guy, you have to allow defenses to be physical with opposing offenses. You can't just let speedy wide receivers run free. And so the contact you see that is allowed between defensive backs, nickel guys, or even wide receivers, it's so different. And far too often we see defensive holding. We see defensive pass interference at an astronomical rate. It's ruining the game. But I think for Sean Payton, he's very, very big on having the officials there and understanding and showing these guys, hey, these are specific rule changes. This is how you must adapt your game. But I also think it's good for refs to be able to get this experience, to be able to just talk to players about technique, because a cornerback's going to say, hey, part of my job is I'm allowed contact within 5 yards. And after that, understand that I'm very limited in what I can do. I have to get in phase, I have to get it on the hip, but I can't be grabby. I can't initiate contact because it's a flag. It's an automatic first down. That's a tough thing to overcome in today's NFL. And obviously, a lot of the rule changes have been slided towards favoring the offense to allow more high-scoring games. And I don't think high-scoring games are the answer. I love defensive football, but I like balance. I think things need to be 50-50 in terms of what favors an offense versus what favors the defense as well. So that is something to keep an eye on here. But can we also talk about Jerry Jeudy? Jerry Jeudy's been a guy who's really had a quiet training camp. And I think when fans are asking me specifically on social media, why haven't we heard Jerry Jeudy's name called quite a bit? It's not anything bad. It's not that he's not doing anything. Sean Payton himself even touched on this. He told us last week that they've been moving around from X to Z to what he calls the F position. And he says, I think we've just been moving around a little bit too much. We want to try to keep him at this position. And really the F position in this offense is a guy who is movable, but not from a role standpoint, doesn't just stay at X or doesn't just stay at Z. This is a player who can move to the outside, move inside, and be a guy who's a utility weapon here for your offense. I think that is something that needs to be considered. And he's been great in one-on-ones. I mean, he's almost been unguardable in one-on-one situations when Denver goes from their group 9-on-7 period, where it's just a heavy run emphasis, getting your run fits in. DBs on the other side of the field with wide receivers and tight ends, they'll be doing one-on-one drills. And Jerry Jeudy, once again, just a fantastic player. Got to give an honorable mention there to Taylor Grimes, an undrafted rookie free agent wide receiver out of Incarnate Word. He's had a really good training camp as well. But for Jerry, he did end practice with a big-time play on Saturday, as we referenced earlier. Russell Wilson finding him deep down the right side, hauling in a 53-yard touchdown catch and pass from Russell Wilson, who just floated up. I mean, it was a beautiful throw there by Russell Wilson. Damari Mathis had pretty good coverage on it, but it was just one of those ones where it was floated high and to the outside to the point where it really just landed in Jerry Jeudy's hands at a very opportune time, and it led to a touchdown. Need to see that relationship between those guys continue to bud and grow. I think that's super, super important here going forward. But one thing we are going to dive deep into on this morning's episode of Good Morning Broncos before I head off to Broncos practice is who are some players on offense and defense through the first week of training camp that stood out. What stood out about them and what type of role might they have? Well, you're going to get that. But first, let's check out a message from our good friends over there at Superbook. Who were some of the biggest standouts during the first week of Broncos training camp? Well, let's dive deep into the meat of things. We're going to look at the offense, and we're going to look at the defense. We're going to talk about what these players have done. First off, let's start off with the offensive side of the ball here for the Broncos. We've mentioned Russell Wilson putting together some pretty good performances the last few practices. You just want to continue to see that stacking ability happen there. But from a guy from day one all the way up until today's practice, who's been really good, who's been a standout? Cortland Sutton continues to have, I think, a very, very impressive offseason. With the loss of Tim Patrick, it's going to shoulder a lot more of a bigger responsibility on him. But Sean Payton has even said, can we get back to that 2019 mixtape of Cortland Sutton where he was a Pro Bowl receiver? And look, they had Joe Flacco that year, and he was still putting up massive numbers. He was mossing dudes one-handed. Casey Hayward, Denzel Ward. I mean, he was taking advantage of those guys in the passing game. But I would say this, just looking at Cortland in person and seeing him, he's bigger than he was in 2019. He's more explosive than he was in that year. And if he continues to stay healthy and stack these training camp performances, I think it's going to be a great confidence builder for him. And not only that, just for the offense in general, I think Cortland can get back to a massive role because you hear from Sean Payton. He talks about it from the standpoint of comparing, not necessarily comparing the players, but in terms of the roles and the impact that they need. And when Michael Thomas was having some of the best years of his career in the NFL before injuries, he really excelled in that X role. And that's where Cortland is going to play quite a bit this upcoming season. His size, explosiveness, the physicality, and also just his ability to block in the run game, I don't think gets talked about enough by fans. And look, Cortland didn't have the year he wanted last year, but I think he's in a prime position right now to really step up and take the reins and become a very, very big player. I mean, other names we're going to talk about at wide receiver, not named Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy. Taking a look at Brandon Johnson, the former undrafted rookie free agent wide receiver. Last year's training camp preseason darling has really emerged into where Tim Patrick was going to play in this offense. And this dates back to minicamp and OTAs. Brandon Johnson's consistently making plays in practice downfield, some explosive plays or plays that are moving the chains for a first down. And in Saturday's practice, they were in the red zone period, and we know the pressure for the Broncos has been extensive. And Brandon Johnson caught a touchdown from Russell Wilson. Great route, scramble drill, found a way to get open. You love to see that because that's been an area where the Broncos just simply haven't had enough contributions. Brandon Johnson's having a very quietly big offseason here for the Broncos. So he is a name to watch, especially as the preseason comes up this week. We'll go to Greg Dulcich as well. And a little bit of a quiet start to training camp initially in the first week, but then toward the end of the week, I mean, he's rotating with the first team, second team, third team units. Sean Payton wants to get these guys reps, and he's catching passes from Russell Wilson that are impact plays, Ben DiNucci, Jarrett Stidham. So he's getting high volume. And maybe I think this is maybe a plan for Sean Payton to kind of become a little bit more quarterback proof or having a player who is QB proof in the sense we can do a little bit of everything with him. Greg Dulcich has certainly been that. I have to give a lot of flowers and praise here to the Broncos interior offensive lineman, Lloyd Cushenberry. I think Quinn Miners and Ben Powers, they've been very physical, and their communication, I think, has been really solid so far throughout training camp because Denver's defense is sending a lot of pressure, sending a lot of simulated looks their way. Their communication is good. I think their overall execution has been good. And Ben Powers is physical. You see that from the onset when you watch him at practice. And he'll play some this weekend in the Broncos' first preseason game, as Sean Payton said, that starters will play. How much will they play? That remains to be seen there. But Denver will get their first look there at Ben Powers. And then Jalil McLaughlin, running back, undrafted rookie free agent out of Youngstown State. He's been a highlight player every single day. He's had a big time run, explosive play downfield, good vision as a ball carrier. And I just think that his instincts are very good too, because there's times where he'll take the handoff. The hole may close for a minute. He's patient. He takes a stutter step or a cut step, finds the open hole, dips his shoulder, gets skinny, and then gets north-south. I mean, you don't see a lot of the things that we always worry about from a young running back, and that's if it's an outside play. Does he run too far outside? Does he never get north-south? Does he just run east-west? Have not seen him. He's good with protecting the football, taking on physicality. He's got some dog in him. And look, I think that we're going to be very, very excited about what we see from him throughout the preseason here. But now that takes us here to the defensive side of the ball here for the Broncos. I think the common names we're going to talk about, Justin Simmons, Patrick Surtain, Caden Stearns, these guys have all had terrific training camps. Damari Mathis had a very good training camp as well. What are some names besides just the starting guys or the impact players that have stood out here at Broncos camp? I think it's important to highlight that. And I'm going to go with new guy and not necessarily, I mean, we know he's a starter, but I have to highlight what Zach Allen has been able to do here for the Broncos and the defensive line specifically. Not only that, what he's been able to create here for outside linebackers and edge rushers, he's freeing up opportunities for these guys by how fast he is. I mean, his first step off the ball, he never gives any indication which way he's going to go. He's batted passes down at the line of scrimmage, and he's shooting inside gaps really quickly to where it forces the offensive line to have to double team him. That leaves one-on-one matchups isolated on the outside. And depending on what type of pressure that Match Joseph is sending, that's why we're seeing the offense get pressured quite a bit. I don't think it's necessarily a problem on the interior offensive line. I just think that they're doing a really good job of disguising things as a defense, that it is freeing guys open in one-on-one situations, and they're winning their matchups that they're having, or they're creating an uneasy pocket for the quarterbacks. You have to have that balance there. And Zach Allen, if he stays healthy, he's going to be a big part of what they're trying to accomplish here. Some other guys we're going to talk about in terms of the pass rush status, not named Randy Gregory, not named Frank Clark. Those guys have been terrific so far throughout camp, but it's players who've needed to have a little bit of a bigger role, and that's Nick Bonito is having a tremendous training camp. I have to talk about maybe the most improved player so far, I mean, there's a couple arguments to be made. Brandon Johnson's one of those names. Kendall Hinton's one of those names. Jaquan McMillan. But I have to give, if we're handing out a little bit of an early award, I think Nick Bonito so far in training camp looks like the most improved player from last year. And then paired opposite of him, Jonathan Cooper. These guys are getting plenty of run, mixing and matching with different units here. Jonathan Cooper has been fantastic to watch, very disciplined against the edge. I would say both of these guys. When you look at Bonito, the biggest gripe about him, I think, from last year and even from his college days, a lot of people said, well, he struggles with setting the edge, maintaining edge discipline, or contain against outside runs. He's been very good in that regard. His pass rush moves, his arsenal has improved. They brought over his pass rush specialist that he had coaching him at college. There's things that these guys are doing, and I want to highlight it by saying, you know, if Randy Gregory or Frank Clark were to miss any time or dealing with injuries, yeah, that's something I think a lot of Broncos fans are worried about. You have Baron Browning coming back from his injury. He's going to be an impact player regardless, no matter what happens. But you look at Jonathan Cooper or Nick Bonito, I look at that room and I think, okay, hey, Denver has 5 legitimately good pass rushers, edge defenders, not just guys who rush the quarterback, but guys who play the run really well. Right now on paper, they have that. And they've been performing really well in training camp. Can they carry it over into the regular season? Really, that's the biggest key. And that's the biggest question we have to follow here as training camp continues. But these are the players that I've seen on offense and defense that have stood out to me on a daily basis in Dove Valley. Week 2 of Broncos training camp is here ahead of Friday's preseason matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. You know I'm going to have you covered every single morning, 9 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time, Mile High Sports on YouTube. So subscribe so you don't miss out on all the conversation we have. Pour yourself a cup of coffee and join me every morning. But Broncos country, I've got to head off to practice. Make sure you stay tuned. MileHighSports.com for my written recap, not to mention the daily video recaps that we do over there. Mile High Sports. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos country. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new Good Morning Broncos.